Hey everyone. Hey Mike, how are you doing tonight?
David, doing well. Excited for this episode of Your Exit Squad.
And for people that are joining us for the very first time, what is your exit squad?
Your Exit Squad is a place where we talk with small business owners about exits that they've made, about exits that they want to make, how we get from here to there. It's designed to help small business owners engage around a topic that, quite frankly, we don't talk about nearly enough. And so that's what we do here.
And over the course of season one, we have been doing a lot of recording, and our typical format is we talk with a business owner, we hear the story of the business, and then match that person up with someone who might be able to help them with any kind of challenges or concerns with the business. And then we bring everyone together for a follow-up conversation to see how things have gone. But we've also got a couple of standalone stories that are interesting and can teach us certain lessons. And that's what we're going to be doing today. We have a couple who had successfully opened up a coffee shop, developed the business, systematized the business, and then ultimately exited. And we're going to talk a little bit about that journey and find out some of the motivations and reasons for the different steps that they took along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. The fact that they exited the business while they were still there and then ultimately exited the business again. It's going to give us a chance to explore what that definition of exit really means.
Yeah. So let me bring Lee and Miguel into the conversation. How are you guys doing today?
Good.
Good, thank you.
Hi.
Hi, guys.
Good here.
Well, I just had told everyone that you had opened a coffee shop, and I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind telling us the story of the concept. How long ago was it, and maybe give us a bit of the taste or flavor of that initial journey to open the doors and start serving people in the public.
So I think we are both designers by training, and we had started working together as a design business, a consulting business.
Mhm.
And we had realized that our income was always going to be limited by the amount of hours that we could put in as consultants. And we didn't necessarily want to have to continue to work more and more hours if we wanted to make more and more money. And so we started to explore different ideas of how we could grow a business that would operate above and beyond ourselves to earn money without us necessarily having to invest more and more hours.
Yeah, that was, and it's funny, like design methodology, like concepting and exploring and kind of thinking outside the box and brainstorming comes very naturally. So like we were like looking at lots of different business types. One of them was a custom chocolate bar company called the Chocolate Experiment. I can't remember some of the others, but
And Miguel's family had been entrepreneurs already.
yeah, my dad had so we had this design business and we knew what the consulting world was like. I also knew what the small business world is like from my dad. He had initially an auto parts store. He's a Mexican immigrant, and he opened an auto parts store, and he also shifted towards remanufacturing starters and alternators. And I got to see him kind of grow this thing, and it had two stores and a factory, so it wasn't insignificant. It was pretty large. But I also got this. He was like the hero of the place, and it took a lot of his time. And I could always go down. So we used to live right upstairs from it. So if I ever wanted to see him, I could go downstairs and like hang out with him. And I would like work the counter at like 12 years old, and look up spark plugs for people and stuff like that. So but there was this realization that having a business means it can have a lot of your time. And I was one of the first in my family to get a college degree and started this. I worked in product development. We started this design business together, and I could see that it was like time dependent again.
Sure.
And so all that to add into like whatever this new thing that we were thinking about, we knew from the get-go, it was going to be designed to not have that element to it. Like it was like, you know, one of the top priorities.
For it not to
that's really interesting. And in fact, this is where I wish we had graphics that popped up on the screen to capture that. So this wasn't a passion play where you guys were like, hey, we've always wanted to start a coffee shop, let's do this. This was, here are our goals for this business. What business models fit those goals is what I'm hearing.
Yeah. And we were noodling on it for a while. It didn't come quickly. And so we were doing a lot of research and thinking about different things. Like Miguel said, we did have this concept for a chocolate shop kind of experience. I started taking classes at the French pastry school, and we were sort of on that path. And then at around the same time, we just personally started to discover specialty coffee. And this was around, I don't know, 2005, maybe.
Okay.
And we were going to some of the best coffee shops here in the city. And at some point, I don't know if we saw a book at like a Barnes and Noble or something. It was sort of like how to financially run a coffee shop or something.
Yeah.
But we were like, oh, wait a minute, let's look at that. And then we found this book and we saw some of the like sort of pro forma income statement kind of things that they had in it. And we looked at that and we thought about it, and we ended up shifting gears towards that. And then our target was really like, try and understand the financials. What would it mean to try and get an SBA loan? We realized that we were at a deficit by not having experience in the industry or in restaurants. So I went and got a job at a Starbucks for 3 months to try and understand what does an efficient system look like for that.
We also knew at some point we were going to be trying to get a loan, and at some point they're going to ask, have either of you ever worked in a coffee shop? And the answer needs to be yes.
Yeah, so we did a ton of research. We traveled to some of the best coffee cities in the US. We started to go to every trade show we possibly could. And it probably took us in total about 2 to 2.5 years from that like conversation where we had, oh, coffee is a business, to where we finally actually did get open. So it was a pretty intensive process, developing the business plan, getting the loan, all that stuff too.
I think it's also worth adding that at the time, there are these really great shops doing really great quality coffee, but the feel of the place, like when you went in there, it didn't really kind of like feel like us, or we didn't really like it. And then there was the chain coffee shop experience had a feeling that was like, there was like a gap between the kind of bohemian coffee shop and a chain like coffee shop experience. Sure. And there wasn't this really like, and coming from a design background, we had the ability to kind of like really redefine and shape with that a different kind of experience. And now you see them everywhere. Like, they're all kind of the warm, modern kind of design and stuff. High quality. None of that existed at the time. We were like, actually, we won an award for our shop that was proof that evolution exists from Time Out magazine. And that was it. We were like changing the landscape, or changing what it meant to have a high quality shop.
Had you guys read The E-Myth by Michael Gerber?
Yes.
Yeah. And in fact, that was one of the books that we had read during that period. Yeah. So we went into starting our business with having read The E-Myth and The E-Myth Revisited. And those were the conversations that we were having. Oh, the pie woman and, all that stuff.
Cash Flow Quadrants was another book.
Yeah. So that was like, we went into it with that. We had a love for coffee. We didn't know how to make it back then on our own. Obviously, that was a part of the research process. But we went in wanting to learn from Starbucks in terms of how obviously Howard Schultz was not in every Starbucks teaching people how to make coffee or making coffee for people. So learning how they do things with consistency and efficiency. And then, frankly, paying for template management, restaurant management books, and seeing how they were doing it. And so when we launched, we were already going in with all kinds of like templates and checklists. And, you know, the first, I don't know, 6 months or something, we probably were there every morning, every day. And Miguel was still doing design work because we needed working capital and we needed to pay our bills and all that kind of stuff too. So those were some pretty intensive years. Yeah. I don't want to give the impression that we opened up and right away we were hands off. We were not. It was very intense for many years, actually, between the two businesses. But even from, I would say, 3 to 6 months in, we weren't the ones opening the store and we weren't the ones closing the store anymore. We had built the systems so that we had an AM shift and a PM shift, and we have an AM supervisor and a PM supervisor. And that's how we ran for a few years before we had any kind of assistant manager at all.
Actually, it's a funny story too. I used to tell my dad and my mom about kind of like how we were doing things, and what they couldn't believe was the fact that we weren't the ones responsible for making deposits in the bank, that we had worked it out so that like even the, you know, the closing shift in the morning would end up do that step. And for them, it was just like, how is that even possible? Like,
wait a minute.
Doesn't even.
You're going to trust someone else with the bag.
Yeah. Like, and I think it's something that you saw at Starbucks. That's how.
Yeah. So we had, you know, basically each shift has to count their drawer before, you know, if somebody coming in counts the drawer before they start, the person coming out counts it when they leave, and then the next person counts it right away. So there's all these like accountabilities and checks and balances built into the system. And then the AM person at some point comes off the floor, does, you know, basically does a double check, references it against sales, et cetera, preps the deposit, and then just walks over to the bank and does the deposit and picks up some bananas on the way back or whatever it is. And so that was sort of like how we had developed that from the start.
So, okay. So before we move past this point, because there's a lot to take from what you've just said. And so many of the things you identified as learning points that you did before you started the business, most owners start to learn after they start the business. So looking back, why did you do it that way? Was it the family history? Was it mistakes you'd seen others make? Why were you as thoughtful about starting as you were?
Well, I think, definitely the family history plays into it, but reading a book like the E-Myth shows you that it's might be possible to do it a different way. And so it's just like, you know, I know oftentimes, and like when you're designing something, I'll definitely use design as an analogy for a lot of life lessons, because that's another thing we always set out to design our life is kind of a way we kind of approach how our life just in general. And once you're aware, a big part of design is like knowing what your options are, and that comes with experience. And so books like the E-Myth or Cash Flow Quadrants, I think it showed us a different way of thinking, and it's basically, it became an option. And once you're aware of that as an option, you can start to work towards that. We just did it very deliberately. And I want to say that in your kind of design training, systems was a huge part of like her, we met in graduate school, and it was a big part of the approach that our school took. And you took like some of the classes you were taking took systems to a whole other level too. I was like,
And I think Miguel mentioned the cash flow quadrant, and I don't always think of that as being a start of the business. I think of E-Myth more directly, but I think the cash flow quadrant made a distinction, and it's been so long, so if I don't quite get the terminology right, forgive me, but basically the difference between being self-employed and being a business owner. So that we were at the point where we were doing consulting work, and we saw we were in one quadrant or whatever it was, and we wanted specifically to move into a different quadrant. And so that's why, like, from the outset, the goal was to create something that wouldn't rely on us in order to run. And I think I heard, Dave, I've heard you say like leverage other people's labor. So I think that's the terminology, but, you know, I don't think that's the way we would have, you know, said it to ourselves, but we might have said it more like we want it to be able to operate on its own and generate income on its own without us.
Or I would say like, you want to own the business. You don't have the business to own you.
Yep.
It's just
Right.
another
Right.
job.
You had intention.
Yeah.
So to that point, give us a sense for when you started. How large? I mean, how many employees did you start with on day one? And if you would ballpark for us the question of capital to get to that point, because that's obviously that's a function of or as an impact for a lot of folks starting a business is they're working very lean, or they don't have the time or the money to do it the right way. Where were you when you started?
So 12.
So before I even answer your question, if you don't mind me to just take 1 second and just acknowledge that you guys set us up really wonderfully and we sound hugely successful. But obviously, this has been a very challenging journey.
Of
and
course.
Financially, things have not always gone the way we wanted. And certainly, even in terms of like setting up systems and wanting to be independent, things have not always over the years played out in that way exactly. And it's been like, there's been sort of cycles that have happened, both in terms of our energy that we needed to put into the shop, and also economically or financially how things were flowing either in or out, and those kinds of things too. So
Love that.
I don't want to at all give the impression that everything ran smoothly from the start. It didn't. There's been many ups and downs along the way. So from the start, financially, to answer that part, we did need an SBA loan in order to get started. We had already been pretty good savers up until that point, and so that gave us a leg up. I think we scavenged money as we could. We maybe did a 401k loan. We did a little borrowing from maybe friends and family or whatever, and we're able to hobble enough together because we recognized that it was going to cost a lot of money.
Yeah, your first year was going to be at a loss. I think it was like we wanted a year's worth of working capital in the bank.
Yeah, in addition to the cost of a build out, which is significant because of things like plumbing and electrical and those kinds of things for a coffee shop. I know it seems like, oh, you just get some thrift store couches or something, but the build out was very expensive, took much longer, and cost much more. And we had sort of accounted for that already. But in all honesty, I think we actually ended up needing to get like a second piggyback loan beyond the SBA loan already, because we could see we were burning through our startup before we even got open. There were some issues with the landlord not turning over the space in a timely way, and we got delayed by 7 to 9 months.
Wow.
We were already having to pay back our SBA loan. So that was an incredibly stressful and financially draining year already.
Oh yeah, the SBA had a 6 months grace period.
And we burned through it.
And we were just like sitting there
open.
closed while we were waiting for some of these things.
Because there was no
painful.
water, there was no electricity in the building. We were done building, but like it wasn't ready. So all that stuff, like I didn't have gray hair before we started this process, but we certainly did. Yeah, even after just that first year.
Oddly enough, the way the universe works though, so like you were in this need where you need capital, right? And on the design business side, like that phone kept on ringing. So I just said yes to everything.
So he was doing design work and I was managing.
But like basically working my own like 3 shifts. Like, I'd get up at 4:30 and work to 6:30. We'd have breakfast. Then I'd go on site to work somewhere till 4:30. Then I'd come home, eat dinner, and then we'd watch a little something. And then I'd work from like 6:30 to 10 and rinse and repeat. But I mean, that was a great year on the design side. But like, we needed to do it, and there was like a very clear reason to do it, and there were systems there to help make that happen too. It was like
So, and then in terms of starting, we were open 7 days a week from 6:30 in the morning. So we needed staff there at 6 a.m. all the way through. When we opened, we were open until 9. And so we needed staff there until 9:30 or 10. So those are long days, 7 days a week with a minimum of 2 people on. So I think we had probably around 10 employees when we started, plus the 2 of us were also working on the floor sometimes too. So that answers that question. And our initial naive, I think, intention with this business was that we would hire a general manager even though we had systems in place, we recognized that we would still need somebody overall, like in charge and with the buck stops with them kind of a thing. And then we would open maybe 2 or 3 more shops, and then we were going to sell this whole thing and I don't know, go off into the sunset or something. And, reality just didn't match that. So we had all these challenges of timing and getting open, and it cost more and all that kind of stuff. We started off with revenue higher than we expected, but the growth was slower. And so in terms of like how reality matched our financial expectations, that was definitely sort of challenging. And it did continue to grow and eventually got to a point where that was much better. But those first couple of years, there were a lot of unknowns about that. And basically, there was just never enough profit there over that. We had this heavy SBA loan that we were paying back. There just wasn't enough money to pay a manager. So that plan kind of went out the window. And then it had been such a sort of stressful process. We had taken what do you call it? Like a home, not a home equity loan, but like our condo was on the line for our mortgage, for the SBA loan as collateral and stuff too. It was so stressful that the idea of now trying to borrow more money to open another 2 or 3, it didn't happen. And so we basically were just on the one shop plan.
And also I still remember in my head, I knew that like, you often hear that like the odds of lasting 5 years are really low for a lot of businesses. And our SBA, to pay off our loans, we needed 6 years. And so I that used to just weigh on me so much.
Yeah, it's you've forgotten about it now, but just those loans were it was so heavy on us for so long.
So the amount of celebration once we got out of the loan was.
Yeah, and then the idea of doing it again the same way was like we were not up for that. And we did start to say like maybe we would do it again once we had discovered the term other people's money, that if we could crack the nut of how to use other people's money, then maybe we would do it. But in terms of putting ourselves in the same hole again, we were just too gun shy. I think we didn't want to go through that process again.
Was there a particular pivot point? I mean, you're going through the startup, we're learning how to run the business, we're doing all that. Do you recall when you got to that place where you were like, okay, it's time for us to start stepping back, it's time for this? Was there a specific point, or was it more gradual than that?
Maybe having Max, not having kiddo.
Yeah. So after the first, like I said, maybe 3 to 6 months, we were really on site like all the time. But don't forget, and this is a strong theme up through recently, which is we're talking about like a 17-year arc, is that we're always on call. Even if you're not there, you're on call. Yep. And I never would have imagined how many things can go wrong with a business like a coffee shop, from everything from the human side of it, staff side of it, to just the sheer number of things that can break equipment wise or facility wise, or technology wise. It's an infinite number of things can go wrong and you never know when they're going to be. So even though we had systems in place, we were still like the buck stops with us, and, problem solving, like beyond us, beyond the individual kind of like transactional level problems, which the staff could solve, always got bumped up to us. So, being on call for that amount of time is really huge.
But I think there's one factor that kind of jumps out in my mind about like when it tells you it's okay to kind of like pull back a little bit, is you end up, I think, with a few staff members that just have this quality of just like there's like a level of they're just like earnest, and there's like a level of like trust,
professionalism, responsibility.
Yeah, and like they won't freak out under pressure. I still remember one of our employees, like there was a water leak upstairs, and so we literally had dripping water coming from our light
above the espresso machine,
pouring
down from the ceiling.
And if you're working and you see that happening, and given on the personality type, some people might just totally freak out, call you screaming, And other people will be like, that's strange. Well, I'm going to get some buckets first and just do what I can. And then calmly say what's happening, send a picture and ask what I should do. And so you start to encounter people that you feel like you can trust more. And that's when I think that's when you start to kind of like pull back. You feel okay about pulling back. Yeah. And you're kind of like focused about initially. I want to say like one kind of, and Lee mentioned that we had talked about the idea of having kind of a general manager. And we did try that once, but the E-Myth, I remember, gives you kind of like this cautionary tale of like, you give that one person so much responsibility and then they leave and then you're stuck in it.
Yep.
And we were kind of about to experience that too, I remember. But then you had this idea of like splitting the role of a manager amongst 3 people. So and you did it in terms of like training, scheduling and maintenance, right?
So we ended up splitting it amongst facilities, staff. So like HR, hiring, scheduling, dealing with the calling in sicks, all that kind of stuff. And purchasing. So that's doing inventory and making weekly orders. But we didn't get there right away, like Miguel said. So to kind of just jump back for a second and we'll jump forward again. Mike, your question was what really triggered a change? We already had sort of stepped back. We weren't there like all the time, but it was really when we were at the point where we were ready to start our family. So we have one son now. And at that point, like when I was pregnant, we already knew obviously that we couldn't be as, we needed more flexibility. And at the time we had an employee and she was just like one of those employees that they just rise to the top. You can just tell almost everybody who works at a coffee shop is, what's the expression? Overqualified.
Overqualified. Yeah.
We're qualified to be there. These are smart, on the ball people who've usually graduated from college and they're in a transition period. So everybody there can do much more than what they're doing working in our shop. But some people just really thrive there and are ready to take on more responsibility, and you can tell they can handle it. And we got lucky that an employee we had at the time was interested. And so I basically had promoted her to be assistant manager while we were pregnant and then had a kid. And it was great. But, people in transition. And at some point she left. And then I think we may have transferred that role to somebody else. And we went through that process a few times, but it was always had that fear of what happens when that person goes. And so at that point, I thought, let's try something different this time. And I split that assistant manager role into like 3 different assistant manager roles, and then had 3 different people. And then at least if somebody left, it wasn't like everything all at once was going to come back onto us like that, because that was always just this weighted kind of worry about that. And that really, like that model, we kind of stuck with for years. And then we also had somebody that we call the training manager that was a little bit more of sort of like a catch-all, helped with systems, helped with training when we had new employees come on board, or with rolling out changes or things that I wanted to happen. So they'd be like more like my go-to person if I needed something to be done, where I would meet once a week in person with all of those assistant managers for an hour or 2, basically, to touch base with everybody. And then I was still on call if people needed things or when things went wrong, which did still happen. So even though we had that system, and that went for years, when COVID hit, we really had to jump back in. And we were also working on projects in the background. So in 2019, for instance, we had been investing time in developing ordering app for smartphones. And that was like a behind the scenes project kind of thing that we would be doing. And then we kind of lucked out that when COVID hit, we had our app sort of ready in place, but we still need to make a ton of adaptations to the way we were running the business during that time period. So that was like kind of like we were a startup again, trying to sort everything out and figure everything out. But other than that, we went back to the like assistants are sort of like running their individual like area. And I'm just meeting with them either remotely or in person once a week for a couple hours and then handling.
So at that point, Lee, at that peak independence, how many hours a week are the two of you putting into the business?
It could be as little as 2, as much as, I don't know, 6 or 7, plus the on-call time. And frankly, it was the on-call time and the constantly being worried. I was still worried if one of those assistants was going to leave. We had somebody leave in 2021 abruptly, like the day we were leaving on our vacation, the person quit. And it was very stressful and worrying and disappointing and all these emotions and feelings and stuff. And it was just this level of anxiety. And so there was sort of what was happening with the staffing and the responsibilities. And then if we were to overlay onto that, what was happening financially with the business over the years, it didn't always match up, right? And so if the business is making a lot of money and you've got more stress, well, maybe that's fine. But when you get these, I can't do this with my hands here, but if you've got like, you're not making a ton financially, but you've got a lot of stresses and worries at the same time, well, those are the times when finally I think we say, is this worth it for us? Yeah. The amount of, there've been more and more, the coffee industry had been changing over the years. Our city, the coffee industry had been changing. And even in our neighborhood, there'd been more and more competition coming in, even from like smaller chains that sort of had indie cred. And it was eating away at our revenue. And so there just really wasn't that much financially. We had these long 6-year lease options that we had committed to, 7 years prior or whatever, before what financially was going to be happening. COVID was absolutely exhausting and terrifying and emotionally draining, having to deal with being everybody's therapist, about how they're going to feel about all pandemic related stuff, whether it's employees or customers or whatever it is. And we just got to the point where when it was time to decide if we wanted to do another 6-year commitment, the answer was no, that wasn't something that we wanted to do anymore.
Also adding to the fact that both of our parents are, late 70s, 80s.
Yeah, we've got personal responsibilities.
They don't live in our city.
Sure.
And so, yeah, you can, looking into the future, like the demands in your time and if there was some revenue there, but like, is it worth it for the amount of stress that you're trading off? And the answer for us in this stage in our life was no.
Yeah, it wasn't worth it anymore.
When you were initially when you started the story, you were talking about how you knew you were self-employed. You wanted to create this business that would require less of your time to create that cash flow. I was immediately thinking about the Cash Flow Quadrants book by Robert Kiyosaki that we've mentioned here. And it's interesting because I was highly influenced by his writing too. It's what led me to go out and buy a bunch of apartment buildings. And when I was young, I used to manage all the tenants and I used to mow the lawns and paint the walls and fix the toilets and all that kind of stuff. And then when my children came along, so I got into that family phase, I couldn't do that anymore. I had to start paying other people to do all those things. And that's when the truth of my situation became apparent. When I actually had to pay other people to be painting the walls and mowing the lawns and all that kind of stuff. And it wasn't nearly as lucrative as I thought, right? Mm-hmm. And it sounds like that's kind of the same sort of realization you ended up making. But by the time you got most of the duties and tasks delegated to other people, and you were really left with the responsibilities, which an owner I don't think can ever really escape from, you were then left at this point saying, is there still enough cash flow here for it to warrant my being concerned the phone might ring at 11 p.m.?
That's right. Well, it's always one phone call away, right? One email away. And we hear all the time in the marketplace about, buy a business and hire someone to run it. And this perception of passive income through business ownership. But the two of you are telling the story that I've certainly experienced and sounds like David has, which is one email away, right?
Yeah.
One text, Mary didn't show up. What do you mean Mary didn't show up? And now I'm down the rabbit hole. But it sounds like at some point you reached a place where you were, where that was lessened, but it still wasn't, you weren't free enough. So you pursued a sale, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the lease being up
was the trigger.
That's the trigger. Like, we knew we didn't want to sign another lease. And so what are our options?
So if we go back a couple of years too, if we're looking at 2018, 2019, where we're like maybe the halfway point of the 6-year lease option, we weren't sure what we were going to do. That year, there had been new competition in the neighborhood. We weren't really sure yet of how much it was going to affect us. And, maybe at that point we thought, oh, we'll just try and make it through the end of this lease, because we did have a personal guarantee on that lease also, which was a big factor also in terms of closing the business down was not really a great option for us because we were on the hook. And then COVID hit, and then that was like the last thing on our mind. It was just survival at any cost. Let's try and keep the business open. Let's try and keep all the staff employed. We actually did okay during COVID, I think, because we adapted fairly quickly and fairly well, frankly, that our financials weren't as bad as they could have been. And then when you add in that, we did go through government support programs through the pandemic, we were kind of okay through that. And then it wasn't until we sort of did our sort of reopen about halfway through 2021 that business started to come back, and it kind of started to come back gangbusters. It was like really good. And at that point, we only had a couple months left before we had to decide about whether we were going to renew the lease. And so, Dave, this is where you kind of pick up into our story, which is that within about 5 or 6 months of that, we were trying to figure out, hey, rather than looking at a wind down scenario, we really could potentially be looking at a sale scenario. And so that's when we were doing research. And we had been sort of like trying to understand what it takes to sell a business for years. And Dave, I don't think I ever told you this, but I had discovered some of your YouTube videos a few years prior. I had seen some comments of yours on Reddit, and I had bookmarked your name. And so by the time we reached out for a phone call to you at the beginning of this year, you were already on our radar as a potential resource to help us with the process of trying to see. We hadn't alerted or gave notice that we did want to renew, which was technically had already been due a few months prior because we had to give 1 year notice. And so we weren't even sure if it was worthwhile trying to find a buyer without having that lease already in place past the end of this year. And so that's when we reached out to Dave to talk about, was this even feasible or not?
And before we talk about the final exit, I'd like to just revisit a couple of things that have been mentioned a few times here, is about how the neighborhood changed, the market changed, the coffee business was changing, new competitors were coming in. We talk a lot about how small business is very risky. And a lot of the times there can be things that happen that have nothing to do with you, your decisions, or your operations can have a huge impact on whether a business can be successful or not. Given the ups and downs that you've experienced over the course of time, and given the frights and the circumstances that have come up by these new competitors that have come in, how do you look at this entrepreneurial journey? Do you look back at it and wish that you hadn't done it, or do you just look at it like some big component of who you are today, and regardless of what the numbers say, you're glad that you went through it?
I think more the latter. I think we're always like, what have we learned from this process? Mm-hmm. And I think also, it's funny, I think this overall, there have been many tough years financially, but there were also good years. And we are very good, like squirrel savers, And so this business has been good to us. It's just also been very challenging, and it sort of has taken over our identity, and it's like everything all the time. But overall, I don't think we would trade it for anything. We learned a ton about business in a way that we
Mhm.
didn't as just self-employed contractors. Just understanding, you know, the realities of what it is to run a business, to understand. I think we had a good sense of revenue understanding, but we didn't really have a good sense of understanding different kinds of expenses. We've learned a ton about accounting and taxes and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, we know a lot of stuff about a lot of stuff. In that process, during that same time period, rather, we also started to try and sell a physical product through our design business, and we learned things about that. So we're just constantly soaking up our experiences and trying to gain new wisdom, and, you know, we'll figure out what's next from that. So I think overall, I don't think we would change anything really.
I remember at the time, in the beginning, we were like, should we do this or shouldn't we? And so, like, you know, when you're asking yourself that question, you need to ask yourself and be honest, like, well, what would you do if it
I
failed?
had to freak out when I was like,
Yeah,
freaking out.
I was like, yeah,
I had to freak out.
And I was like, what if it fails? I was like, if it fails, you know, we both have college degrees, we're employable. I had worked in an auto parts, doing deliveries for my dad's auto parts stores. I know what it's like to work in mechanic shops, and it's 100 degrees out and you're doing deliveries. And I'm like, the worst case scenario for us is not bad compared to what like a lot of people are facing. So like, and also like, do you want to live a life where you kind of say to your, you know, like, at least we tried, you know? And I think that's something that like, we'd rather have an experience of trying. And also that doesn't mean to be foolhardy, right?
Right.
Do your due diligence and make sure you're doing your best. And if you fail, but you could say, I did my absolute best, then you really have nothing to be afraid of, I think. And that was something that helped kind of like, okay, let's just take this leap.
And what one other thing from that conversation that Miguel said that I think affected me hugely was, and maybe it was in what you just said, but I just want to highlight it, is if it all goes wrong, we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
You know, we are capable and we will figure it out. And I don't know, it was like a big relief to just, I mean, it's not like I didn't know that, I guess, but I just needed to hear it.
And so when you made the decision, you know, we don't want to renew our lease, we met and I helped you guys out, but you guys really sold the place on your own. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that and the types of buyers that you met, and what your experience was like when you started to talk about, you know, selling this business you had developed to one of these new people?
So we knew that, we also read your book. I didn't add that one in too. We understood that this is not like a multi-million-dollar business that's going to appeal to, you know, particular kinds of investors and all kinds of stuff. So I think we bounced between realistic and pessimistic. That's probably like the range. We're like very cynical about things or whatever. And we had questions. You know, I think before we reached out to you, Dave, we also talked to a local lawyer who we thought might have some I don't know, business lawyer who we thought might have some ideas too. And we just basically really didn't know whether or not this was something that was going to be appealing to anybody. And so when we reached out to you, we came out of that feeling pretty good. And I don't want to like sound like I'm just like, oh, Dave is so great, but we came out.
Don't go down that road.
This guy really knows his stuff, you know. Like we really had a great conversation with you, and I just want to say, like, that's not always the case when we talk to professionals and advisors. I think oftentimes, you know, we are a little disappointed, frankly, with the advice that we hear or the kind of thinking that we've heard, or even other kinds of professional services. We've, you know, as entrepreneurs, I think we think that we're the best and we know how to do everything better than everybody else. And sometimes that seems to be the case after we've worked with somebody and we've paid them, and we think like, geez, we probably could have done that ourselves and paid a lot less money or had a lot less stressful experience and stuff. And so the idea we had on our whiteboard here, after we spoke with you, Dave, we had literally a list that we made up, and it was like the pros of trying to do it ourselves and the pros of trying to hire a broker, and also the cons and the risks of that. And I think one of the biggest ones was that, like, we hire a broker and we're not really thrilled with the investment that they put into the job, and we end up basically like coming in to try and do it anyway. And now we're paying a broker and we're doing the work ourselves. And so we felt, because of the sort of products or the packages that you offered, Dave, that you could do the parts that we felt less comfortable with, and you could add some wisdom and experience to, but that we also brought things to the table. We're clearing out all our files right now because of the business. And I literally have right here the business plan that we put together to sell the business to the bank, 16 years ago. We've sort of gone through the process of trying to sell this business too. And so I think that ultimately the path that we took, which was sort of two-tiered, I would say, like where we sent out anonymous profiles to prospects through you, to help with the anonymization of that. And then also,
and these were to the potential strategic acquirers. So these were people related somehow to the coffee industry. Sure. that you had picked out that might have been interested. So that was one tack that was taken.
In which case, like, I was the one who went through and did the research to create that list. And that's what we would have been looking at, I guess, a broker to do. And I didn't feel that I felt I knew the industry here better than some potential broker would anyway. And then the other path was to have you list the business anonymously on the business buy sell kind of sites, which we assumed a broker could do that part, fine. And so I think we just felt that between our skills and your skills, and certainly our motivation, like we had the most motivation of anybody would have, that would be as good, if not better, than trying to hire a broker, and potentially would save us money. And I think that in the end, it probably did. And honestly, I'm not so confident that a broker would have been able to do what we were able to do.
Yeah, I just want to add that, like, that's all through the lens of, like, the lease was going to be up in October. If we had 3 years to go through this process, I don't know, maybe we'd have looked at it differently. But because
this was a time-sensitive operation,
it was very time-sensitive, and for reasons outside our control too, because trying to sell during COVID and all this, like, it was just complicated. And so,
sure,
yeah, we were definitely incentivized to work as hard as we could and do the best we can to sell it. And also the mindset of, like, if we do our best and we can't,
then we did all of our best.
Then we did our best. Like, there was really nothing else.
Because in all honesty, I was very, very stressed out about the prospect of having to close the business.
Yeah.
Having to lay off like 11 or 12 people, and to have what is frankly a beloved institution in the neighborhood close, and to become a pariah in our community for having closed this thing that frankly people really, really love and have strong feelings about. And I didn't sleep this year. Like, it was a very, very stressful year. I appreciate also, Dave, you talked me down off the ledge a few times too, I think with some very curt but to the point emails, which I appreciated. But it's been a very emotional process too. This is not just about numbers. It's about our life. It's about our reputation. Yeah. It's about, guilt and, all these kinds of things too. So that answers the first part. I know you also asked a question about the kinds of buyers too, but I'll just pause there for a second in case there's anything you want to say about that before I answer your second part of your question.
Well, no, I appreciate the kind words. Thank you very much. And yeah, like, tell us about the people you met. Were there some big surprises or insights when you started to have these conversations?
Yeah. I mean, how many real prospects did you end up talking with? Not the tire kickers. How many real potential buyers do you feel you engaged? So
in total, it was probably really like maybe around 4 potential options, maybe 5. So in a loose and somewhat anonymous-y kind of way, I will say that the first response that we had was from one of the direct reach outs from researching what Dave's calling what would you call them? The
strategic buyers. Yeah.
Something. And we, met after hours at the business, did a tour, and had some conversation. It was somebody that we knew from the industry a little bit. We didn't know him personally, but there was some mutual respect already. And they wanted to use or hoped to work with an investor that they knew to do to other people's money, the OPMs, which we've never figured out how to do, but happy for anybody else who can figure out how to do that. But the investor was not very responsive, and it just kind of fizzled out. And so then we actually had another person that we knew in the industry fairly well, so well that I hadn't felt comfortable having Dave send them out the thing, but I just reached out to them individually, and they were very interested, almost like overwhelmingly so. And we had about a week of, oh boy, this looks like it's going to happen. And then sort of reality set in as they started to, not even doing due diligence, it didn't even get that far, but just once they started to like slow down, talk to other people in the company, and then that sort of didn't really happen. And so that was like, whoo, big emotional roller coaster. And then at that point, I think that's when the listing had gone online, with an anonymous sort of one pager. But if they did the NDA, then we would start conversations. And we started to get some nibbles and bites, but from our perspective, they really weren't the kind of buyers that we thought would be successful taking over the business. And I don't know how many of those, but my guess is maybe there were like 5 or 6 or 8 of those. But we had a couple of phone conversations, but really nothing ever really moved forward too much from there until one did about a month or 2 in, and it was a strategic buyer, and that started to turn into like more serious conversations.
Wait, one of them even got an offer though from the non-strategic person. One of the,
that's what I'm talking about right now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, and eventually they actually had a visit. They were from out of town and they came and visited. We had a big dinner. They even met with the landlord. I don't know how much actually in detail I want to get in here, but let's just say that was moving towards an offer coming in. And then it just so happened that the very first strategic buyer that we had met with that had the slow responding investor had another investor, and they came back in at almost exactly the same time as we were getting an offer from these out of town strategic buyers. And that timing certainly helped us because we were able to say, hey, look, we've just got an offer. If you're serious, let's try and move this forward. And then basically we, as I think Dave put it, divine intervention. It seemed divine intervention. We actually had these 2 competing offers right at the same time, which from there we ended up working with the buyer that had been the first person that had come to us, and that we knew locally and that we thought would be a good fit overall for the business. And so again, another couple of months of a lot of stress and trying to make sure, just because we were so under the gun for timing because of the lease, but ultimately it was a full price cash offer, and we took it, and we're just finishing up the process of transition right now.
And it looks like things are going okay over there. I still go there in the morning for my regular drink, but yeah, still working.
And if it doesn't, there's nothing really we can do about it. We've tried to support them as best they can, but they're actually extremely independent, more independent than I would have thought. They've wanted really less support from us than I would have expected, but maybe it's not surprising. They're already entrepreneurs and business owners, and I'm sure they think that they know that, or feel like they know what they're doing and that their path is right. And so we're just trying to step back, and the last couple of months have been us sort of unwinding ourselves, both transactionally, but also emotionally, from this business that's been just such a key part of our life for the last 17 years.
Tell us more about that part, because I've been lucky enough to sell a few businesses, and I have gotten addicted to that time period right after the sale. Talk a little bit about that. What did it feel like to sign that piece of paper?
It's the analogy that was put forth to me, and I think it kind of fits, is it felt like we were sending a kid off to college.
You've known everything about everything they're doing all day long, all the time, and now all of a sudden they're still out there, but like you're not so entwined with it, and you don't really know what's going on. So
Yeah.
I even had to I didn't realize that I'd had these habits of like five plus times a day of going and looking at Square on my phone and just seeing how sales are going. You know, it's just this thing you do, just like you check your email and you check sales, and you know, that alone it was maybe a week before I was like, you know what, I don't even need this app on my phone anymore.
And
I don't have to do this anymore.
Sale this was during we had a 30-day kind of transition, like we're like
we're on call.
We're on call kind of to be involved. And so we live close to the lake, and I'm playing basketball with my son. They have a nice basketball court out there. We're having it's beautiful morning, like 10 o'clock in the morning, sunny, it's gorgeous. We're playing, and then I get my watch dings, and I see a Slack message, and it's like, you know, the fridge hinge broke. So like the
milk fridge
is, the door won't stay closed. Now it's just like, I'm like, oh, here we go. This is like exactly, and I just want to be focused on playing. And I see I see people respond, and it's not me. And like, you know, in a matter of 15 minutes, there's a plan to get it's done. Like I'm like not involved. And that was so satisfying. And I just continued to play basketball, and that would not have happened.
Yeah. So, you know, there are so many great things about this business over the years, both financially and what we've learned, but also the relationships that we've built, and the positive feedback from so many people, the connection to our community. There's a ton of really great things. But there are also a lot of stresses and little problems that come up. And so I told you this, Dave, already, but now that whenever we have a sense of something that could be a problem or a worry, or even just other things in our neighborhood, you know, these other businesses that have opened competition, they used to be a source of stress for us. We would cross the street to not have to, you know, to see these competitive businesses and stuff. And now like that weight is lifted from us because it doesn't hurt us. It's not stressful for us that there's like other coffee shops in our neighborhood. In fact, now we can kind of see it as it's actually a nice benefit that there's other coffee shops in the neighborhood. And of course we want the business to go on, you know, really well, of course, too. But whenever we have a sense that something is going on, or we see a thing, we have a little thing we say, which is nope. And it stands for not our problem evermore.
I love that.
So there's a lot of great things, but also there's a lot of things that are not our problem anymore.
Love that. What a great story. I mean, the journeys, the ups and the downs, and you tell the story with such realism and true engagement. I just want to express my appreciation for that, because again, this exit space is so weird for so many owners, and you guys have been on an authentic journey through that, and you touched almost all of the key areas, right? I did it independently. Looking back, any call out, anything you would do differently? What's the one lesson learned from this to pass on to owners who are listening to your story?
Before I actually answer that one, or if you have an answer for it, I will just say that one thing about the process that I don't think we mentioned that I think is a little heavy is that it's also a very lonely feeling, at least that I had. And you know, I think the fact that we were a partnership made it bearable, but there's a huge amount of loneliness in terms of bearing the weight of those stresses and not feeling comfortable sharing them with our friends and family, friends especially, and especially because a lot of our friends live in our community and our customers. And, you know, we don't want people saying, oh, did you know that you know, there's worries and stresses, and that, you know, the competition is hurting them, and, you know, all this kind of stuff, or problems with staff. Like, we're not the kind of people that want to share that stuff with other people, especially because it could even harm theoretically the brand or the whatever. And so
maybe that's a lesson learned. There needs to be an outlet for that kind of thing.
Maybe I really think that there's a space for just like business therapists, like self-employed owner therapists. And Dave, you acted a little bit like that during this process, but even for not just during this process, it's and I don't think I think there's an idea that, the CEO is the loneliest job, or, I've certainly heard that kind of idea before, but it certainly is true that it is, these are burdens that and sometimes joys that we carry internally and all on our own that is definitely tough. And so one of the really like the big things that I'm feeling right now is, in addition to our nope perspective, is just like being able to be fully present and honest with the people that are around us. Like during this whole year, we only had like one set of friends really that we kind of let in on like what this journey was that we were going through. But now there is nothing stopping us from saying like, oh, this is where we are. And we're actually separated from that business. And yeah, we're feeling good about where we are and can kind of be open and honest. And I feel a little bit more open and honest in general. And I really appreciate that.
Lee, that comment that you just made, and this wasn't pre-planned, but that's the reason why this podcast exists, because for us, it was recognizing that this journey, this space is a lonely one for owners, and there are partners out there that can create that connection. So thank you for sharing that. That's a huge reality.
I'll send you the address where you can send the checks to.
There's a lesson learned. I just thought of
Please.
Something. The personal guarantee on the lease really bugged me. The more I thought about it and realized it for what it was, and if I were a landlord, I could totally understand why you would want that on there. But once a business has proven itself, it shouldn't be necessary anymore. I kind of feel like a lesson learned would be like to push harder, or try to kind of knowing that I would try to have it written in the language somehow that where like if it survives 5 years, that's like no longer a part of it, like a clause. And the other lesson that I think I learned is like really trying to cultivate a relationship with the landlord and kind of clue them in kind of like what's going on business wise. And because there's this like fear of this, like renegotiating the lease, or kind of the next time you're going to sign it, be like, hey, business, we can do it at this level, and we feel very comfortable, like we'll be successful with this. But at the current level, it's just there's too much competition, and like it was always this like like we didn't feel comfortable having that conversation. So I don't know, like the lesson learned there is just like trying to kind of just be more or do something different, because for me that was just like a sort of stressful.
Yeah, relationships with landlords can be very, very worrisome to navigate, especially in a business like yours, where it was very much location dependent. I mean, this is the place people knew that you were located.
And a huge investment for build out too, right?
Yeah.
Like it's going to pick up and go 3 doors down.
Right. Well, exactly. It's not like you're an insurance office or something like that, where it's just a matter of moving some furniture if you wanted to relocate. You have a very sticky relationship, and things like the personal guarantee. I think that's a function of experience. Like if you were going to enter into something like this again, you would have a whole different point of view,
Yeah.
right? I know that, I've been involved in deals where people have signed personal guarantees on seller financing notes, for example, and have negotiated time limits to those guarantees. I'll guarantee it for this amount of time. And just the understanding that certain things are actually open to be negotiated is something that a lot of new business people don't realize. But, for prime locations, I was listening to an interview with a restaurateur who signed some leases on some prime restaurant locations in Manhattan during the pandemic because some other restaurants had closed. And he saw that as an opportunity to get control of some very lucrative prime spots. those landlords know that they've got, the best spot in this neighborhood or whatnot. They understand the value oftentimes of what they have, and aren't afraid to negotiate from a strong position if they are, sort of the big corporate landlord or whoever. I think it's different if you're dealing with an individual, for example, who might have a building as an investment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And ironically, the personal guarantee from the landlord's perspective did exactly what they wanted it to do in this situation, right? It kept you from a year or two earlier saying, that's it, we don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
And we certainly made mistakes. The advisors that we had at the time, I think we weren't, in retrospect, really that thrilled with, that could have been offering us those kinds of advice. And frankly, like, enthusiasm may have gotten the better of us, right? Like, that looking for the right location issue was huge, and this was like a big thing that we were trying to launch, and the excitement and just wanting to get past that step and do it, may have caused us, if we'd had that advice that like, these things are negotiable also, like, we may have conceded on them anyway, just because we were so like wanting to do it, So, and again, that's, I think, just like naivete and inexperience, that yes, definitely we would do some of those things differently, that you do have to make sure that those terms work for you.
Of course.
Well, awesome. I want to thank you so much for sharing your story with us today, because I knew that it would be a fantastic story because of everything that I learned about you and the business while working with you. And yep, I just wanted to say thank you again for being willing to come on and share it with all the other people to help give some insight into not only what it was like for you to organize and operate the business, but what that exit looked like and what factors prompted you to make that choice, even after you had organized the business so well to really require relatively small amount of your time.
What a great story. Thank you so much.
It's our pleasure. And I've already told you, Dave, but a part of the reason we were open to doing this was that, we really appreciated the wisdom that you brought, and we've had a lot of interactions with a lot of advisors, and I think we just frankly were really impressed, and we wanted to thank you and share back a little bit of how much you've and helped us. So thank you.
Thanks so much. I'm happy that everything worked out, and I'm glad I was able to help you that way.
Great.
Good luck with the podcast. I'm looking forward to listening to all the episodes.
Yep.
From a note perspective.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Lee and Miguel.
Sure. Bye.
Take care, folks.
All right. What an incredible story, Mike.
What a great story. And like I said, authentically experienced and shared, right? There are ups and downs. Once you get past the patina on any of these exit stories, there's always that anxiety, that stress, all of that stuff, even when you get a good outcome like these folks did. And I really appreciate them sharing that with our listeners.
Now, if someone out there is a business owner and they are thinking, wow, my business isn't nearly as organized as Lee and Miguel's, I don't seem to be on top of everything like they seem to be. Maybe there's some work that I need to do on my business before I might be able to exit one day. Where would that person be able to go, perhaps, to share their story, or maybe even get some help from us or some of our friends?
Head on over to yourexitsquadguests.com. It's up on the screen there. There's a quick application to fill out to tell us a little bit about your business. And you'll see with some of the other episodes that we have, as David talked about earlier, come tell your story. Let us help you understand or try to figure out where the need is. And then we'll look to match you up with one of our Exit Squad partners to help you grow and change the business the way you need to. And if you're one of those potential Exit Squad partners, David, where would you go?
You'd head over to yourexitsquadpartners.com, partners with an S, of course, which has a brief form that you can fill in to talk to us a little bit about your background and expertise, how you help small businesses, and then you may become paired up with one of our guests who needs some help.
Great stuff. Great story.
And just a reminder for everyone, if you head over to yourexitsquad.com, it'll lead you to the YouTube page for the show. You can hit the subscribe button and the little notification bell. As we unroll season 1, you're going to meet more and more of our guests, our partners, and you're going to hear the stories of transformations that we've been recording now for the past 4 or 5 months.
Yeah, some exciting things already. Some really interesting impact.
It's going to be a lot of fun. So please join us for the ride. I know you'll enjoy it, and maybe you can be part of season number 2.
David, good stuff. We'll see you next time.
All right. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.